better roll them dice. You never know if it could change your life. Take a chance, you're neither wrong or right. You never know if you don't roll
Actual Prep. Actual Prep. It's another episode of Actual Prep. Hey everyone, it's Dungeon Master Matt with another edition of Actual Prep, where, unlike an actual play, instead of playing the game, it's me by my lonesome with my notes, going through my thoughts and ideas and working some things out as I build a game for some people, some friends and some players. I have the opportunity to start a new campaign. I've wrapped up a lot of one-shots and short things in which I was a player or a dungeon master, but I've got a group of people who are ready to start a new Dungeons and Dragons campaign. Now, I have an interesting mix of players coming in. I've got some who have played a single campaign before, and I've got about half who have never, ever played a role-playing game before. So I'm keeping that in mind as I'm prepping. And if you're tuning in for the first time or you're wondering if this episode is for you, I think I'm going to split my time between talking about how to prep materials for like a session 0 for people who have never played the game before, and how I'm actually prepping the actual adventure and the like situation that the players will encounter. And if I'm lucky, I'll have time later this week to record after our very first session and what's going on. So for this first part, I think I'm going to start with prepping the actual campaign and then move on to what materials I might want to put together for like new players that have never played the game. And if you're a member of our lovely Patreon community, if you support the show, I'll post all of those materials on our Patreon. So thanks for supporting the show. Okay, let's get started. So like, a lot of people talk about the scariest thing is a blank page, and it's true for a Dungeon Master. Like if you're starting a new campaign, the possibilities and the cool things you can do are infinite. And there's a lot of FOMO in your head about missing out, about like, whoa, what could my campaign be? If only I set it up perfectly, then it will be great. And I felt that way for a long time, but I think one of the things that helps is to just pick a place and start and know that the answers don't have to be there. So I've decided to keep things simple because it's a busy week or a couple weeks for me at work, that I'm going to just start with our best starting adventure of all time. Again, available on our Patreon page, which has players as new adventurers show up to a small town. There's a mystery, sort of a call to adventure, and a small dungeon. So let's start with creating the world. So like the cool thing is for me, I've got like the first adventure squared away. Like I know the players are going to show up in our best starting adventure of all time. The town of Three Bells, that they will, rescue or confront someone and go on an adventure. They'll get to second level, and that this will be my opportunity to build out the world. But see, the thing is, like, if you take a starting adventure, whether it's ours or someone else's, or if you use Crypt of the Everflame from Pathfinder, or even something like part of like Lost Mine of Phandelver, you still need more, because at least for me, when I'm starting a campaign, I can't just have a starting adventure, because after my players complete that starting adventure, I'm going to say to myself, well, shit, I'm basically starting over again if they don't have any connections to the wider world. So I've got to build, at least I've got to build a world, I've got to build a region, and I've got to draw some connections for whatever first starting situation I put my players in. Here is something I think I have found useful. Your mileage may vary, which is when I start with a adventure or a town or a starting location, I draw out 3 rings. And maybe this is because I live in a town that is surrounded by ring roads and loops and circumferential concentric highways, those roads, the loop roads that go around town. So this shapes my thinking. But I think in terms of like Ring 1, which is close, which are adventures that players could access right away, places they could go to immediately, things that need confronting. And this is close in a narrative sense, right? People that are close, problems that are close, but also locations that are physically close. And then I have a medium-term ring, which are things players know about that they could go ahead if they really, really wanted to reach with effort. And then there are things that are far, which players may hear about immediately, but no matter what they do, they can't actually either get to that place or reach a point in the narrative where that becomes relevant right away. So again, it's just something silly that helps me organize my thinking of like hooks and other stories that I want to include close, medium, far in the narrative. So the other thing I forgot to mention is I think this will hopefully be an example of just how to commit epic plagiarism, how to truly do it's still a lot of work, but the least amount of work as possible, because I have so many adventures that I've casually read or read in depth or played before that I'm itching to like get into a campaign. And so for me, when I'm given a new campaign, whether I end up using them or not, I love stealing stuff from other things. So I'm also going to give you an example of just how to take whatever you've got floating around in your mind, floating around in your bookshelf or, a file folder labeled adventures I have purchased, and just throw them into a campaign. So using our ring system. So again, I'm using the town of Three Bells. It's a coastal town. There's a small adventure. There's a dragon. There's maybe some fae connections. There's maybe some other things. And I want to think, okay, well, what can I put near a coastal town? What can I put in that close ring that I can have my players encounter next adventure, that I might want to go ahead and seed the adventure, seed into things like straight from the start when they're showing up in town and they show up at the Dragon's Landing Inn and they talk to a couple people before the adventure begins, or after the adventure begins, they go around and investigate. And so I think about like what's in the town. Well, we put a wizard's tower in Three Bells. So one of my favorite adventures is one from Arcadia where there's a sentient wizard's laboratory. And I've decided, okay, that's the reason the wizard has been missing. If the players at all bite to the fact that someone says, oh yeah, there's a giant wizard's tower in town, no one's seen the wizard for a while, they can open the door and they can go to my version of a sentient wizard's laboratory. And that's like a little mini dungeon they can confront in town. And I already have the Temple of Syrinx. Again, you can check out our best starting adventure of all time on Patreon, and that's where they can investigate that. I know there's going to be some clues from that. I know that I'm going to put a island off the coast where the dragon had their eventual headquarters. And so I, again, go to my like plagiarism library and I'm like, okay, well, what would go good there? And I looked around at a lot of things. There's a great Pathfinder adventure that I've run before, From Sea to Shore, about an evil aboleth that has an island headquarters. And the adventure, on like second viewing, I'm like, this is maybe not that strong, but I love the idea of an evil aboleth. So I decide, okay, if they ever investigate this island that is on the map, there's an evil aboleth there. So I just write down evil aboleth on my, near folder. And then I decide to do elsewhere on my like close ring, like a little mapping. I put 2 woods and 1 hill next to the starting location, that after they get out of the farmlands of things, I'm like, well, what could they go to? Kind of approaching things like a hex crawl. So I've got a northern wood and a southern wood. The northern wood, I think one of the coolest names for a wood is the Cloak Wood from the Forgotten Realms. And even though all my players have played before, none of them know the lore that well. So I'm just going to keep the name the Cloak Wood. One of my favorite adventures that I've reviewed on the show and have run once and would love to run again is the Cinderlings adventure from Eyes Unclouded, a Studio Ghibli inspired offering on DM's Guild. So I know I'm going to put the Cinderlings in one of my like hexes of the Cloakwood. And I also like putting just kind of random NPCs. So I'm going to put like a cool elf ranger in there. I'm going to put some other fairy problems. Maybe just like one hex is like there's some fairies that will play pranks on the players, and they might have connections to any other. They can tell the players stuff about any other fae things I have. In the Southern Wood, I think I'm going to throw in, there's one of the things that I loved from Ultraviolet Grasslands in the Dark City is a tiny encounter, which is the Octopus's Garden, a cave with a sentient octopus that's just like growing things. So I'm going to steal that and put that in the Southern Wood. And I've always wanted to run the Gripply adventure from Candlekeep Mysteries. It would probably need to be scaled down since it's in my close ring. I also think about like my close ring is like my close, medium, far as low, higher level, and then like slightly higher level adventures. So I think I'll put that there. And one of the fun things about this adventure is the Gripply adventure from Candlekeep Mystery also has a village of, it could either be snake cultist or Yuan-Ti cultist. So I know I can put some snake cultist either as a part of the close ring or maybe the medium ring. Speaking of ultraviolet grasslands, there's a great part of it, like kind of the midway through, is a massive dungeon called the Near Moon, a giant sphere that just floats over some hills. And okay, this is a thing for me, and I don't know if it comes up for any other dungeon masters, but I find that if I start building a world and don't pause and do this like check yourself thing, that the world ends up being like really mundane. There's like a lot of human farming villages and trade towns that maybe make logical sense, but are not that interesting. I'm like, I got to put weird shit in. You might be like, okay, you just mentioned some fairies and some octopus gardens. I'm like, no, I want weirder. So putting in the Near Moon, which is again, a giant floating moon right over a hill that's like, half a mile across is perfect. Do I know what's going in there? No, but I'm thinking just the best parts of Journey to the Barrier Peaks, and that's it. And I don't know what else should go in the hills near my town. Rob and I made this great dungeon, the Root Mine. I've run it once. I'll put that there, which means I can put a little dwarf town, and I need some elves. Well, I still got the Southern Wood next to my town, so I'm going to put some elves in there, and, maybe some loggers, and maybe these elves don't like outsiders. I'm trying to think of what I could do to make these elves interesting. Let me pause. There's some elves that control wood. Let me think about it. Okay, I'm back. I just thought, well, what if these elves have like a really cool clan-like society, but they all live together, but your clan identity determines whether you're associated with, I don't know, like one of the elements or one of the humors. Maybe I'll make my elves humor-based, bile, blood, something like that. I'll change the name so it's not so stupid and obvious. But these clans don't like outsiders, but maybe they let people in for a market. Maybe they've got some problems. Okay. So my Near ring is nearly complete. I should add something else along the coast. And I love running the haunted house from the sinister Secret of Saltmarsh. So I'm just going to put that up along the house, and people will be like, hey, there's this weird abandoned house that people have seen lights showing from. And then that can connect me to some smugglers, some pirates, some lizard folk if I want. And then I'm going to throw up some other things that I definitely didn't think of them on the fly. I've been noodling on this for like a week. A giant dragon barrow, a big mound shaped like a dragon, a huge man that looks like a wicker man that has been standing there untouched for centuries. I don't know what either of these things are, but if the players are interested in them, I will, before that session, prep them. Again, also like stealing stuff, just in case I need it. I'm going to steal the town of Coneyberry from Phandalin because it doesn't connect that much with other things. And there's a cool, I can't remember if it was a hag or a banshee that lived there, but it's a ruined town. And I'm kind of getting the feeling now that like Three Bells is like out on the frontier. There's not a lot of other settlements by it. Maybe there's one or two. So putting in Coneyberry with a cool hag for the players to barter or encounter is great. And I also need to put a like lizard folk and a Sahuagin settlement. So a couple of places down the shore, I'm going to put a lizard folk spot, and then out to sea somewhere, I'm going to say there are some Sahuagin. Looking at my other like adventures that I like, there's a great dungeon, the Tower of Storms, from the Dragon of Ice Spire Peak. It's the second D&D starter set, and it's a fine, perfect dungeon, and it's on the coast, so I'm just going to put it somewhere on the coast the players can know about. They can go there. And then one of my other favorite starting towns is the village of Hamlet. There's lots of weird cultists going on. I'm going to play up the weirdness of that. So I'm going to say Hamlet, and I've put in my notes more cultists. And I'm going to put that a day or two's travel away. So at the edge of the first ring from Three Bells. And of course, next to Hamlet is a moat house and a cult that the players can investigate. And then I have to come back to my starting adventure. And one of the things that you have to do when you're planning an adventure at the very beginning is you got to put in things that are constantly pushing your players into some sort of narrative conflict or situation. And this could be a place to explore. I think that's the easiest way to do it, but it could also be some other conflict. And so, I put in I put in our merchant from this adventure, Rufus, and he definitely wants them to escort a caravan that could go to Hamlet and somewhere else. We have a druid in this town, and I think that they're going to push the characters to investigate the weird fae stuff in the Cloakwood, and they also know about the haunted house. And I have a capitalist in this town who owns a salt works, and here I'm going to bring in my medium ring, which I've talked about this, mentioned it before on the podcast, but I really truly love, and I have been wanting to run, and we'll see if my players bite, Hot Springs Island, the Dark of Hot Springs Island, which is a old school kind of hex crawl investigation on a neat island full of elementals and fae and weird dungeons and weird elfin runes. And so hold on one second. Let me pause and read back through this. So looking back through the Dark of Hot Springs Island, I've noticed something about the elves, which is that they had like a really cool, all-powerful civilization, but it's completely collapsed. So for my like broader world building, that's told me something about the elves. And it also involves like a weird East India joint stock company, the Martell Company. So I'm absolutely adding that in. And I'm going to say that my merchant in town has a ton of connections with this company. Maybe that's who she sells her salt to. I'm also looking at, in our starting adventure, what other suggestions we should run next. And for my medium ring, depending on where players want to go, I've decided I'm going to put up some mountains past the hills of Three Bells, and there's going to be a mountain pass. And I'm going to put the town from our Rumblings adventure there. Now, my players in this new campaign have played my Rumblings adventure. So if they want to cross that mountain pass, there's a fun on your way adventure. On the other side, I'm going to put some of the things from Phandalin. And I'm also going to, down the coast, I've got two directions on the coast. On one of them, I'm going to incorporate some of the things from some of the adventures I like from Ghosts of Saltmarsh. I'm going to put some islands out there, including Firewatch Island, Isle of the Abbey, and of course our Sahuagin civilization underwater. And Rob and I, if you're a listener of the show, just reviewed the Abomination Vaults. So I'm also going to put Atari down there. Now, do I want to run this campaign through a giant mega dungeon, especially when they didn't start in Atari? I don't think so, but I think I could turn this mega dungeon into a much shorter dungeon on the fly if the players are interested. If they find a weird dungeon, they're like, actually, this campaign is about a dungeon crawling. We like dungeons. Let's go there. So I've got Atari in one direction. And then I've again been rereading Rise of the Rune Lords and the parts I like. So in the other direction, and this makes sense, in one direction it's forest, in the other direction it's sand and desert, I'm going to put Sandpoint. And this has oriented me so far. And they're like, okay, it's wetter in one direction, it's drier in another. Perfect. That's my medium ring. I still need what happened to our central tension here of the dragon. And I think after looking back over all the stuff, I'm going to have two things. We have an evil dragon that somehow did a deal to destroy this the good dragon, Syrinx. So I'm going to put an island that is ruled by an evil dragon that the players can confront if they want. And I'm going to put the runes of Syrinx's home horde, and I'm going to make that taken over by aboleths and their slaves. Other medium-term things. So again, I've got Hot Springs Island. If you're on the coast, pirates are interesting. I'm going to add even farther down the coast a pirate port. And again, stealing things. You can't go wrong. There are two great pirate cities. And maybe there are more. Actually, there are three great pirate cities that I have encountered in publications. One is Freeport, and I believe this is by Green Ronin Press. So I'm going to put Freeport down there. Another is Riddleport by Paizo, and Paizo also has many pirate ports. Another one is Port Peril, I believe it's called. So I don't know which of these this pirate port is, but I know there are pirates further down the coast, and if the players investigate, I will spend some time either combining these or just picking one. All right, so I've got my near and medium term rings filled out. I've noticed I don't have any big cities at all. So I did this not while on the fly. I've come up with a name for a big city, Look By, which I love the city name of Look Shy from the Exalted series. And I need a city that's like a wretched hive of scum and villainy, a free trading port that is still not like an actual pirate port, but are under some actual authority, a place for rogues and other urban characters in my campaign to be from. And I figured, well, since we just read Abomination Vaults, and Otari is right next to Absalon, Look By should be right next to Otari. I know it could be a stand-in for Absalon. I've never used it in a campaign because I don't think we've ever gone there, but the city of Magdamar from Paizo, where there's a city built under and on top of a giant bridge that once spanned a fantasy Strait of Gibraltar. It just gives the city such a cool vibe. So I'm going to steal that for my city of Look By. It might be part of some kind of trading league and stuff. And then I think, okay, now we're getting to the big picture. Now we're getting to the outer ring of our plagiarism and stealing. And I'm looking back over some of the adventures we've reviewed on the show, some that I've read on my own, and ones I really like. I really like some of the stuff from Curse of the Crimson Throne. And I also need a place for wizards to be from in my academy. So I'm going to add a Corvosa-like city somewhere on the next farthest ring. I also thought, okay, well, what if we got really weird with it? What if we got some Dark Sun and Eberron with it? What if we got some cannibal halflings riding dinosaurs? people on giant worms. So I'm going to add a desert on the other far ring. I'm just going to, in my notes, write cannibal halflings. I'm looking around for desert names, and I'm going to steal from Varissa, from Galarian. I'm going to steal the Cinderlands because it's just a perfect fantasy name. Looking at adventures and things that I really wanted to do, our favorite adventures from Journeys Through the Radiant Citadel were definitely the ones set in the Dewalongo Archipelago. This is the Philippine-inspired adventure, so I'm going to put that off to the side, along with, I don't have any Vikings yet, so a Viking area. I also kind of liked, as long as I modified it a ton, the adventure in Zinda, so I'm going to put that as a free city nearby. And then farther away, I'm also going to put in case my players want to do the adventure set in Dajani or ever visit that city ruled by an angel, I'm going to put Akrin, Sangar, and Dajani also on this. So, okay, now I've kind of mapped out some rings of adventure. I need to actually define some things about my generic fantasy setting. You might be like, why aren't you just running it in one of the other settings? I'm like, well, I could, but I want to impress some of these new players. I'm like, I've got my own setting. And I also sort of had in the back of my mind, this could be thousands of years before the revolution for my leveler setting. But that's just a bit of ego that you don't actually need. But I have these 3 rings. Let me do a little bit of mapping, and I'm going to link the map for our Patreons on our Patreon page. But okay, let me pause and do a bunch of mapping, and see you in a couple hours. Okay, I did a bunch of mapping, and I came up with a basically peninsula-shaped region, and I took the map of the Iberian Peninsula and flipped it upside down as my starting point, and I've come up with the very generic-sounding name of Arturia. And based on my rings and where my players are started, I decided that the one half of this, the far half, is under very clear control of a central government, or at least a feudal government. And the part where our players start, and maybe the southern part where the desert is with their weird barbarians and crazy stuff, is nominally under the control of whatever king or emperor rules Arturia, but is more or less, fend for yourself. And so I've come up with the names of the Azure Sea for the controlled half of the peninsula, the sea off of it. And that might be like an inland sea of Mediterranean. I haven't decided yet. And stolen from Greyhawk, the Wild Coast for the area starting with 3 bells and going down to our pirate-like port. Either Freeport or Riddleport or Port Peril. I also decided, I was like, well, what if I want to do Spelljammer with this campaign? What if my players get really, really weird and wacky and into pirate stuff, and I want to run our modified version of Light of Xerxes? So I looked at the free adventure on D&D Beyond, the Spelljammer Academy, and there's a weird port off to sea called Nimbrall, so I put that way out in the middle of the Cadian Ocean, which is the name I gave to our ocean. Maybe there's a continent of Cadia past it, but yeah, Nimbrall's out there, and if the players seek it out or tell me, yeah, we want to do Spelljammer, then that's there. Back to the civilized part of our peninsula, I decided that there would be if it's Spain, maybe there are some Corteses, some noble houses, and they have some vote and control over the king, but the king wants wants to be the all-powerful divine ruler. Maybe that's the tension. I came up with a couple of house names. And then actually, to peel back the curtain, if you're stuck on names, and this worked for me because I'm from Texas and have lived here the majority of my life now, I picked the Texas Division I football schools, which all have very heraldic symbols, and I modified them a little bit and jumbled their names and then changed them up a little bit. But it also gave me like a little bit of an attitude for each of these 8 noble houses. One of the great things about Game of Thrones is it's like the noble houses in this that are, the important power players all have like very, very defining characteristics, almost to a fault. The Lannisters are greedy and sneaky. The Greyjoys are Krakens and are pirates and Vikings. Like the Starks are honorable and cold. And in Texas, at least to me, like the Division I colleges all have these like characteristics. Like, okay, the Aggies are like Texas A&M, for people not from here, are like Hicks, but they're good at like engineering or something like that. The people from Southern Methodist University are very, very rich and probably resting on their laurels. So I've done that. It also gave me a symbol for this empire, which fits remarkably well with Spain. So the biggest university in Texas is University of Texas at Austin, which symbol is a longhorn or a bull, which is also the symbol of Spain, which I take as an omen from the Dungeon Master gods that I'm on the right track. So the House of Ustane, which is a jumbled word of Austin, rules the kingdom of Arturia. And one of the things that I really loved about the Valorane setting that we had was the idea that the king, who was really old, turned young again, like a 90-year-old king, got a potion from some adventurers, or paid some adventurers to get him a potion of youth or longevity or whatever. And this, of course, fucks up the entire dynastic system. And you have a king who is essentially like 22 years old and is going to live for another 70, 50 years, with grandchildren about to have great-grandchildren, and the system cannot sustain this. So I think if the players get interested in politics, if I have like any nobles or something, this will be an interesting tension. The king versus the parts of his family who want him to die. I'm also building my world, and I've also noticed I don't have any... I'd sort of defined wizardry. I have a wizard school in the city of Corvosa, which I've renamed Corvara because Corvosa, I always mess up saying that. But I do need some gods. So I was thinking, I know a couple of my players who have never played Dungeons & Dragons before are really into astrology. So I was like... trying to come up with a fun way to meet them without giving new stuff, and create a fun thing where like they can tell me that, oh, actually Virgo is like this, Scorpio is like this, and I'll be like, yes, actually that's true, your character is of that god, and that is canon in my campaign. So for the 12 gods, I have taken the 12, actually looking at Wikipedia earlier, I noticed there's a 13th disputed sign of the zodiac, and you can't get any better than like, is there a weird god that doesn't exist, or maybe doesn't exist? And I've decided to make the signs of the zodiac the gods, and of course keep Druidism around as an old faith. So we have Aquarius, the water bringer, god of farming, community, and technology. Pisces, the scaled one, god of tempest, oceans, music, and emotion. Aries, the ram-headed warrior, god of war, sports, bravery, and violence. Taurus, the bull-headed mystic, god of patience, spirits, and unspoiled nature. Gemini, the two who are one, god of truth, lies, thieves, and guardians, so some opposites. Cancer, the god crab, god of homes, sunrise, sunset, birth, and life. The divine king Leo, god of fire, light, royalty, pride, and power. Virgo, the maiden lawgiver, god of industry, law, labor, and civilization. Libra, the judge, god of justice, judgment, balance, and peace. Scorpio, the poison sting, god of secrets, passion, death, revenge, and shadows. Sagittarius, the archer, god of philosophy, knowledge, and travel. Capricorn, the horn god, god of wealth, prosperity, and strength. And then Officius, Officius the unknowable, god of magic, mysteries, and strangers. So when you're creating a pantheon, it's good to look at all of your domains and make sure every domain can fit at least one god. It's also really useful to look at lots of other domains. So I looked at the domains at the back of the 5th edition books. I also looked at the 4th edition Pantheon because I kind of weirdly like that one, especially that there's a god of industry, which helped me be like, all right, yeah, I got to have a god of industry, and then maybe a god of nature, which I think, but like 2 nature gods, a god of nature that's like a god of farming, like Aquarius, and then a god of nature that's like a god of leave nature the fuck alone, which is Taurus. So I also, since they're the signs of the zodiac and ostensibly should be constellations in the sky, I started writing in a thing to introduce my players to the world that everyone in this world is born under the sign, just as we are with the zodiac, of one of the gods. And now, of course, when you're creating your character, you can choose what sign you're born under, but you can also reject your god. Like if you're born under the sign of Taurus, but like you feel pulled to like building industry, then maybe you've rejected your god. Maybe that could go in a number of ways. You could become an atheist. You could become a god hater. You could become a druid. And then one of the things that always bugs me about Dungeons & Dragons is like, what is the relationship between druidism and clerics? Some campaign settings are like, oh yeah, druids are, special divine spellcasters attuned with nature, primal spellcasting, and they venerate the gods of nature. I think that's the way Greyhawk does it. Or Forgotten Realms does it. And then some are like, druids reject the gods and they worship something before the gods. And I find that like kind of interesting. Like, okay, druids don't, in my world, the way I've written it, it's like they don't say that gods don't exist or don't have any power. They just say that like nature is better. And to me, this like presents a like kind of a cool cosmology in that we have a celestial orrery-based cosmology. We have the earth, which is for the druids, and then we have the stars, which are literally the gods themselves, reminding us they exist every night. And then we have the planets. And I mean planets in the classical sense of sun, moon, Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn, who are our guide to the will of the gods. Sun and moon being most important, but all the planets mattering. So I was like, I'm going to come up with some cool names for the planets because I spent too much reading astrology. If you ever want to like read the basics of astrology, you will get a ton of clickbait articles. I don't recommend it. And then of course, Wikipedia, my go-to for all things dungeon mastering prep, does not have a lot about what are the personalities and traits of a Virgo supposed to be, because that's not like verifiable information. So you've got to go to a weird clickbait site. So I've got my 5 planets. I'm just going to use like the archaic. I was going to use the Spanish name. I'm like, that's weird. Why don't I use like an archaic Latin, like vulgar Latin name for each of the planets? So I did that. Like I picked like archaic Sicilian, so we've got like Martes, Mirces, Joves, Viernes, Saturnus, right? And then my days of the week can stay the same. I don't have to come up with new days of the week for this campaign setting. Okay, so I've mapped this out, and you might be wondering like, okay, well, what's the story going to be? What's the thing? And it's like, I don't know yet, right? These are people, so all the people in this campaign, except for one, I have never run a game of Dungeons & Dragons before. So I don't really know what their preferences are going to be. I don't know if they want to do like a linear story, hopping between place to place, like Light of the Syrinxis, or if they want to do a like weird hex crawl, or if they want to do a political thriller, or if they want to like get weird with it and go investigate, weird fae and elementals, like in The Forest I put, or Hot Springs Island, or if it's going to be somewhere in between. I just don't know. So I'm always afraid of, for players I don't know, coming up with a thing. The people who approach me are like, will you please run a Dungeons and Dragons game with us? We're like, we kind of want to play Dungeons and Dragons. Like we watched, like, so one of them is a person who has played in my campaign before and is like, I just love role-playing games. Like half of them are people who are like, I'm curious about Dungeons and Dragons. I've always wanted to play. I just want to play. And then like 2 of them are people who are like, I have watched or listened to, I don't remember, Critical Role, either the animated series or the podcast. And we played a short campaign over the pandemic. And so given that, I just can't say like what this campaign is going to be about or what the central like conflict or tension could be. But looking at what I've written, I think I have some ideas. I've decided, now that I've got this campaign, that there is going to be an established church of the whole zodiac, right? Where priests venerate their own god, but they also, of course, venerate all the gods of the zodiac. And they're going to be a huge power, especially in the civilized part of this kingdom. I've also decided that because of this tension of a king taking a potion of youth or of longevity, that this kingdom is rife for civil war, and that there may be some kind of religious power play to turn Arturia into a theocracy. So that's one possible tension. Imagine Warhammer 40K Empire, time of the 3 empires, civil war. Another tension could be like pirates, evil pirates versus like good pirates, since we're on the coast, and exploring the lands of the coast. I put a ton of cool places. I even put a kingdom along the coast I've called New Sarai. If you ever want to like get, into some Eurasian history, there's Old Sarai and there's New Sarai, and they're both very cool on the Volga River, I think. The kind of post-Mongol cities. And maybe I'll put one of the characters or one of the NPCs in the starring town as the heir of this. But so another tension could just be exploration of the world and like bad pirates versus good pirates. And the players can go and explore all the fun places from Journey to the Radiant Citadel and other stuff. Hold on, I'm going to pause here. I have some ideas for things beyond this far ring. Okay, so I looked back over some other notes. One of the advantages of prepping a campaign when you've been dungeon mastering a very, very long time is you just have millions of notes everywhere. So for a couple years, I ran several campaigns in a setting called Levelers, in which, basically socialist witchers protected small villages. And I wrote up some stuff about some evil empires that would threaten these like idealistic communes. And I think I'm going to use some of those as other kingdoms. So I know that across the Azure Sea, this Mediterranean that I've been, are the 8 cities of the Ioun, just like the stones, megocracies, where there are wizards. Maybe they have a wizard school. Maybe it's Strixhaven. And then on the other part of across the Intersea is a place called Thule. And it is a place ruled by warlocks. And then not next to this continent, but across from it, but very nearby, are a league of free cities, of which Look By, my wretched hive of scum and villainy, is technically still part of, despite being part of the Kingdom of Arturia, sort of a Hanseatic League situation, is a big step, where there are lots of dragons and dragon empires and dragon nomads. And then I decided there's a continent across the ocean earlier. I still haven't picked what's there. doesn't matter. If the players are interested in crossing an ocean, I'll have plenty of time to come up with something there. So, okay, now I've like shaped out like this world pretty much to my satisfaction for starting. I've created a list of 1 million adventures that I'm stealing from Ghosts of Saltmarsh to Rise of the Rune Lords to random one-shots I've created and run before, to the Village of Hamlet, to like, rumblings, to just fun ideas like a weird hag, some fae. I decided to come back. I added a Gripply, I already had a Gripply village. I'm always coming back and being like, there needs to be more weird stuff. I added in the mountains next to it, people sometimes see a flying castle. If my players want to go there, they can. I don't know what's in the flying castle yet, but I know it will be cool. Okay. So I have prepped out my adventure. I want to talk a little bit about if you're running for brand new players. God, it is so hard to make a character. Now, we talked about on the show how it's perfectly fine and in fact a good thing to get out your RPG consent checklist, have everyone fill it out, and then have everyone make characters and talk about the campaign. Here's a problem I've encountered before, is that all that's fine, except if it's a session 0 where the majority of people have never played a role-playing game, they don't have the vocabulary and the experience necessary to be like, well, I kind of want the campaign to be about this. They don't know what anything is yet. They're babies. So it's hard to have a session 0 that is like that beyond just making characters. And in my experience, if your first experience playing Dungeons & Dragons is just making a character, you don't really want to come back. Okay, there's a solution. You can give people pre-generated characters. And I thought about that, except I have the other half who has played before and who wants to make characters. So you could give people pre-generated characters and be like, okay, after this is over, you can change things and fix things up. But there is something, despite its complexities and being just too damn complicated, something special about rolling up your first character or rolling up a new character if you've played before or not. I love it. I think most people love it too. And I want the people who are playing this campaign, and they have all said that like they don't just want to do a one shot. They want to do a campaign where we meet, every week or two. So I want to give them that experience. But that means I need to get through character creation in about an hour so that we have at least 2 hours to do the adventure. So at least there's some interaction with NPCs, a mystery to be solved, some sort of exciting combat encounter. So I need to put together a player's guide. I need to put together a campaign. So I don't want to put together a whole campaign Bible. And the reason I don't want to do this is because I don't want to overwhelm my players with information. I want to give them... Okay, I got to make this. Hold on. I'm going to pause here. I'm giving my players a 13-page thing. Hold on. It's not actually 13 pages. It's actually 4 pages or 2 pages double-sided. So on one page, I wrote creating a character. Creating a character is easy as ABC, abilities / ancestry, background, and class. Give them the instructions for generating their ability scores. We're rolling and a spot to write it down. Because when I've had players roll before, they just write it in the margins of their character sheet and then they're erasing it later. Perfect. And then next is ancestry. What I did, because there's just too much information to view on D&D Beyond, and all of my players like have jobs and like kids, and I know that for most of them, they're not going to take the time to do homework. Also, no one should ask you to do homework. Homework sucks. I have written a 1-paragraph summary of each of the 9 races. And by written, I mean copied and paste from D&D Beyond, plus some example names for each one. Then I wrote a quick paragraph about backgrounds and generating traits, bonds, and flaws, which I will do with them. And then on the next page, I wrote again, and by wrote, I mean stole, a 2 or 3 sentences about each of the classes. And then I grouped them using the new playtest: warriors, priests, and mages and experts. I add some stuff that I want them to answer, finishing touches. And I wrote 4 questions plus some extra prompts under each. Why are you an adventurer? Who plays your character? Like, what do they look like? What actor is playing your character? Alignment. And how do you know the other party members? I said, you can't answer this, that. We're going to do that swapping cards with people thing when we play. And then, because I came up with all this information about the world, I wrote 2 pages about the world, front and back, and I kind of wrote it in the 3 rings. I wrote what you already know about the town of 3 Bells, which, again, I'm not expecting my players to read this before, but I'm expecting that after the first adventure or after the first couple, they go back and reference this. And then I wrote what's beyond 3 Bells, what's in that middle ring. And then I wrote who are the important factions in Arturia and what's beyond Arturia. So, and then this is kind of mostly for me to keep track of the basic information. Now, I said I gave my players 13 pages. I've printed all of these out, and I don't expect anyone to read it. And I've only told you about 4 so far. What else do you need to make your characters or should have around during the first session? I copied and pasted the tables of adventuring gear, armor, and weapons, front and back. So that's another page. I have found on a website by a fun artist, graphic designer, r-in.w.net, little things that say ability scores explained, alignments explained, what does your background say about you, what are the base classes, and what are the 9 races, with little art. And I have found, I've used these before with my high schoolers, is that instead of reading text, players would rather see what amounts to an infographic. Like, I'm looking at the what does your background say about you, and all the backgrounds from the player's handbook are here. And it says criminal, and it's got a picture of a brass knuckles, jewels, and a knife. And it says knows the right people. And that tells you all you need to know about the criminal, right? It doesn't tell you what the skills are, or the the equipment you start with, or the class feature, right? The background feature of criminal, but it helps people make a decision between criminal and, let's say, sailor or sage, right? And so that will help my players, just in a nutshell, distill down what these things are. I can't recommend these little pictures highly enough. r-in.w.net, or you can see how I've combined them together on the example player's guide I gave to my players for my campaign. And then the last couple pages are just some maps. One of 3 Bells that I made, one of the region around 3 Bells, and one that is as big a map as I've made. And I don't expect players to ever look at this before when making their characters. But if they're like, I want to be from a town, then I can hand them this map, and then I say, pick one of these towns. You'll be from there. And if the player, a couple sessions into the campaign, says, oh, I want to be from a town, I can still do the same thing. Okay, so I've created a player's guide, not exactly a campaign Bible, a combination how to create a character in 5th edition and what should you know about my world, plus some maps and some infographics. Okay, I've talked enough. It's time for me to play my game. It's tomorrow. If you're really lucky, I will record some stuff after I play this game. Whew. Okay, so I am 24 hours out from running my first session of a new campaign. Good news, everyone. It was a success. At least people said they had fun, and I think I know they had fun because when I said, okay, when should we schedule our next thing, everyone was down to do the hard work of scheduling a thing, right? They put their money where their mouths are. So I think they want to play again. They had fun. We ran the best starting adventure. We did not complete it, which is kind of a fail. I would have loved to complete it, but we only had 3 hours. And some people were late, so we took about an hour to hang out and create characters. And then we only had 2 hours of playing the game. And if you are a Patreon member, for the best starting adventure, we made it past the giant crawfish, and they fought and killed the dretches, and we ended when they arrived in the orrery room. So they made it into the third room of the dungeon. They also spent a lot of time talking to some NPCs in the tavern, and I was able to push some of the, there's all sorts of crazy things going on in this world, and really forefront the fact that people in this town had disappeared before, and that no one had seen the wizard or their apprentice Sariel. So I was able to, who knows if anyone will remember it when we come back in a week, but I was able to forefront the big bad, and I think they liked the town of Three Bells. Damn. It is really hard to make. I ended up having another person, I wasn't sure who was going to show up, 7 new characters in Dungeons & Dragons, even when you're mass producing it, even when everyone has phones, and I sent them all the links to D&D Beyond for their classes once they had chosen them and stuff like that. So this is what I did. I gave them all the starting equipment. Some of the people forgot to write them down. We did not finish writing everything in their stat sheets. What I basically did is whenever a roll came up, I was like, okay, this is what's called a skill roll. This is what's called an initiative roll. This is what's called an attack roll. And we took 2 minutes for everyone to fill out what their attack value plus should be, what their initiative value should be, later on what their armor class should be. So literally no one had armor class written down on their sheets until the first person got hit with an attack. And I said, okay, who here has, leather armor? Okay. Who here has side leather armor? Okay. This is, okay, this is what everyone's AC is. I literally, and I because I played enough, I did this really quickly. I could walk around and in 30 seconds give everyone an AC value. And then hopefully it taught everyone what AC was. Essentially what I'm saying, when you're playing with new players, at the beginning of the game, I gave our standard spiel, which I think we mentioned on episode 1 of this podcast, that okay, this is a collaborative storytelling game. It's playing pretend, but with random chance and some rules that make it exciting. You're all characters playing a single role. I'm the producer and director coming up with situations for you to confront, playing everyone else in the world. Think of it like a collaborative radio drama. And then we went from there. But other than the rule of, I said, okay, here are all your dice. There's a lot of different sides. This big one here, everyone pick theirs up. This is the D20. When I ask you to roll something, it's usually going to be this one. And if you roll high, that's good. If you roll poorly, that's bad. So on our second session, I've got to make sure that I finish and flesh out everyone's character sheet, which is maybe a blessing in disguise that we didn't get to the end of the adventure, because I would definitely want to level them up to level 2 at the end of this adventure, but that's fine. It'll feel like leveling up once they have all of their abilities written out. When character creation happened, the party was light on gods. No one picked a cleric. Heavy on nobility and criminal backgrounds, which is great. So maybe we'll still end up doing, the pirate ideas are looking promising in the future, and so are noble houses feuding in the future. Now none of the players who picked noble picked a noble house, which I had listed out on the player's guide. That's fine. But overall, it was, I think, a success. And I think one of the things about D&D 5e that I really, I wish I had was just, I wish they would just, sell a page for every class and every background and every ancestry or race that was just its own separate page, so that I could give them the little infographic where they could choose. And then after they've chosen, I could hand them that thing, and it would not just have all the stuff. It would just say, okay, now write down under features X, Y, and Z. Now add skill X to your character sheet. Now add language Y to your character sheet. So that would be nice, but I'm going to sit down and do that with, I'm planning on taking, another 30 minutes to help them finish their characters at the end. And I think, I think for me, this is an important lesson is that I probably spent just as much time preparing like handouts to facilitate character creation as I did my world, and it still wasn't enough. And yeah, I think that says something about D&D 5e. Okay, so I want to wrap up here. Thank you for joining me for another episode of Actual Prep. I should note that if you're a Patreon subscriber and you're looking at the maps I put together, I made them using Inkarnate, that's spelled with a K. I looked at, World Builder, which I've used before. I looked at Dungeon Draft or Wonder Draft. And I kind of just picked one. If people are interested, please let me know by dropping us a line at dmofnone@gmail.com. If you'd like me to try the other fantasy mapping things, and maybe Rob and I can do a review of which fantasy mapping software is worth your money. I also took the time finally to look up what issue of Arcadia the Sentient Wizards Laboratory is from, and it's from the very first issue, Arcadia 1. I can't recommend Arcadia enough. So if you support our Patreon, I appreciate it, but also, man, the Arcadia Patreon gives you a lot more for your buck than we do. At least I think. Anyway, it's a pretty great Patreon. I love getting that magazine every month. I also did a little count of the different published adventures that I had pulled from, and I think I got up to 12. So yeah, you don't have to pull from this many, because really you only need 3 or 4. And also looking back at what I've made, I'm like, all right, what's going to happen next week? Almost certainly we'll spend probably 30 minutes helping everyone make sure they have all the correct things on their character sheet. We will, without a doubt, I have a 99% certainty we will reach the end of the best starting adventure ever. The players will confront Zariel and deal with her in some way, and they may have up to an hour to spare. So they may start doing another thing when they go back to town, besides shopping and talking to NPCs and talking to each other. I think the most obvious hook, based on my notes, was several players were very interested in that there was a wizard's tower in town. The wizard had never come out. So I went back to that adventure of a sentient wizard's tower. There were some parts I liked. There were some parts I didn't like. I also remember there's kind of a sentient wizard's lab from Candlekeep. So I took some things from that and I combined them together to make a full dungeon. So I have a full dungeon for the players to experience, and my goal for the next session, other than everyone having a good time, is for them to finish this adventure. And if they choose to start and have enough time to start one, it will be this Sentient Wizards Dungeon adventure. But I also want to feel out what else they're interested in, so I can know what else to take from my store of published modules that are just sitting on my bookshelf or in my hard drive, and actually prep it and put it together. Looking at all the stuff I've done, I think the one I want to run the most is, the Dark of Hot Springs Island. I'm really digging this. So, if they seem at all interested in that, I'm definitely going to, float that out there. Now, it's definitely, obviously I could scale everything down, more of a level 5 adventure. So I think I'm going to keep it hanging in the air until they've had a chance to level up. Okay, well, so I've prepped a new campaign. I started a new campaign. It's the best feeling in the world. I've got to keep in the back of my mind that I should always try and come up with a way to end the campaign in about 6 months, so that I can play it for another 6 months, and that the campaign can end in a year and change, but no more than 2 years. Always better to end a campaign before it gets too stale than to keep it going. And I think, I don't know, I think this, because I took some random things from my Levelers campaign, this campaign in my own mind, not for the players, is a fun backstory to hundreds of years before our brave socialist levelers might stand up against tyranny. Hey, everyone, thanks for listening to another episode of Actual Prep, a guide to starting a new campaign and doing massive plagiarism. I hope you enjoyed it. Like I said, if you have questions, dmofnone@gmail.com, Twitter @dmofnone, and if you want to see all this other cool stuff, support us on Patreon, patreon.com/Dungeon Master of None. I'll try and do my best Rob voice here. Thanks everyone for listening. Stay healthy, stay safe, and keep rolling them dice.